It was women that were fighting as the great strike came to be. The men were at the windows of a sit-down factory. 44 days were nothing, while the women walked the line. To break the greedy bosses, we would march all winter time. Join the CIO, come and join the CIO. Across the land we all were watching the women on parade. They joined the great Flint shutdown, the emergency brigade. Join the CIO, come and join the CIO.
There are many facts that have been left out of the history books about the role that the women played. These red berets and these red armbands faced danger, faced shotguns, faced the buckshot, faced the tear gas. This armband still has the tear gas on it. The Women's Emergency Brigade of Flint, Michigan made American history. We are the foremothers of today's young women, and we are proud of it. Because it was there that I learned the great stamina and the great courage and the intelligence and the foresight and the daring of women when they're put under fire. I think that you men saw that too. And it was one of the greatest experiences I've ever had.
Join the CIO, come and join the CIO.
Jeter Walker. Hello, oh my. And you're Delia Parrish?
Yes, that's
oh. God. And Nellie, I know, Nellie. Oh, God love your heart.
It's been a long time.
Oh, 40 years for you and me.
Yeah.
Here's the day the women were on the one side, the police down the middle.
Oh,
here it
that's
is.
a picture. By God, that should have gone in the thing, and they haven't got... There we go. And at one point we had the newsreels caught us with our sticks all the way up. Did you see this one picture? I haven't seen that for years.
We took food to the homes, we took food to the strikers.
And of course, these two were factory workers. Oh, there's 1,000 names and 1,000 faces if we could only just capture them.
Yes.
We were the pioneers of the labor movement. We feel we were.
Well, the first job that I had was during the Depression. They were hiring at Briggs. So I went in the plant, and I'd never been in a plant before in my life, and the noise was terrific. I thought I couldn't stand it. I got nervous just looking around. All these people working, and rushing here, rushing there, and the lines going. Well, I'm just a kid, really. So I get the spot welder, and every time I get my two little pieces together and start welding, and those sparks would fly, well, I would drop everything.
I love machines, any kind of machine. But my husband, when I left, said, now, if they want to offer you a job and put you on one of the big machines, don't take it. I didn't answer because I knew I was going to take anything I could get, because back then, he didn't have a job, you know, either work or starve.
That's right.
That's right. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I'd make these instrument panels. You know, they used to be real pretty, all made out of metal and varnished. It was real pretty. I made a lot of those, and doors, 10 hours a day, 25 cents an hour. I sure made the money.
Now, in my particular case, my father wasn't working. He was a carpenter. It was wintertime, and they didn't work much then, and it was Depression time. So my sister and I were supporting the family of 7. Sometimes we'd go to work and work 2 hours, maybe be sent home. no sick benefits, there was no health and welfare programs, there was no Social Security, there was no unemployment or anything like that. All of that has been built since we founded the UAW. At that time, we figured it was a privilege to be able to work in a shop. I had worked for $1 a day previous to this in the hospital, but I never realized till after I got into the shops there was no safety equipment of any kind. On the press I was on, the day girl lost 2 fingers. And they told everybody, don't tell Nellie when she comes in, don't tell Nellie, but about 15 told me before I got through the gates. When I went in, there was a finger still laying on the press.
And they hired all women down there. They laid off the men, hired the women because they thought they didn't have no more sense and to work for nothing.
Then there was what they called women's work, like the women that worked in the candy factories.
You didn't look up, didn't dare look up. They watched you so closely, and if you had to take a break, well, they had the matron timing you when you went into the restroom. We ran in there and ran out. The more you produced, well, the more likely you would keep your job.
The foreman wanted attractive women. So most of the girls were pretty nice-looking girls, or else they were back-breaking workers.
If you was the kind of a girl that would let a boss pat you anywhere you felt like patting you, or if you would go out with him after work or something like that, you was pretty well assured of a job. But then if he got mad at you over some little thing, he could let you go just as easy as the one that wouldn't. In fact, they had a Lafayette investigation, and they found out that one whole department was being treated for venereal disease. And that was just because the foremans were using the girls and holding over their heads. If they didn't know what they wanted to do, they wouldn't have a job.
Yeah, true.
My husband worked in a very hot place in the paint shop. And of course, when he'd come home at night, quite often I'd have to rub his back down with soda because it had peeled from the heat, the constant heat that he'd been in. The bodies had to go through an oven, and he often had to push them through there in the course of his work. And his back just cooked.
My husband used to come up the stairs with swollen hands and just throw himself flat on the floor, and he couldn't sometimes hold a fork in his hands afterward. The man was so driven by the speed up inside the factory that he came home unable to be a decent companion to either his wife or children, and she had to take an awful lot of bad treatment from her husband. When a person is driven beyond human endurance, you become just so resentful inside yourself, it's got to spill out somewhere. Very often the men would go to beer gardens to release all of the tensions and the threats they had received inside the factory. Their wives would be home just crying their eyes out because the money was being spent in a beer garden. Flint was famous for its beer gardens and churches. And of course, the churches played the role of consoling the wives and promising them that no matter what they had to suffer here on earth, that someday in heaven they would be rewarded for their patience and their virtue. And that's all we had in Flint, Michigan. Churches and bars. General Motors was the world's largest industrial corporation at that time. The heart of General Motors was in Flint, Michigan.
They were the big wheel here. They had the judges behind them. They had the mayor behind them. and a little man had no chance.
You know, you were dealing with them for everything that you got. For instance, you buy a car from them. Okay, you finance that car through their company. They got your money, even though you worked for it, they turned around and sold you and got it back from you.
They owned the town, or got control of everything. All but me. They'll never control me.
Oh, hi.
Got the coffee on?
Yes, come on in. Oh, hi, Delia. Laura, so glad you could come.
During the sit-down strike, we were organized.
Yeah.
In 1937, the early part.
37, yeah.
And Helen could remember some of that.
Gosh, this has been so long ago.
1938, 38. There's the Ford Drive for 1937.
That's when the union had sent outside people in to try to draw us into the union and to organize us.
Solidarity Forever.
And really, we were fighting for dignity, and I would say, I don't remember at the beginning money being mentioned. I don't really think we were fighting for more money. It was, I always say, treated like human beings, because we were not treated like human beings.
That's why the organization of the UAW was merely a struggle for survival. I was hired in the AC in 1936, and one of the men from the Tool and Die had been talking to us about signing the union card, joining the union. They were so secretive. Like if you went to a person's home, they'd turn the lights on upstairs, but you'd go down the basement and talk by candlelight.
We met in a little coal shed. No heat in there at all. Well, we just about froze to death.
So I signed a card, and then I got fired. No excuse, no reason, no nothing. And I talked to Roy Ruther. And Roy says, well, there isn't much we can do for you now because we don't have the strength to help you. We've got to get organized before we can do anything about that. So he asked me if I would like to help to organize, especially the women. Because the women, I think, were more difficult, don't you, to try to get them to get into the union.
The majority of the wives and many of the women working at AC Sparkplug felt that it was a terrible thing to strike against the hand that feeds you. Where would anybody be if it weren't for General Motors? The woman in the home was a very, very isolated person. They were always tied to their kitchen and to the nurseries and to their homes. The men could walk off from it, go to the union hall, whatever, but the women couldn't get away from it.
Management had their way of getting to the wives. They felt if they got to the wives.
It is an old company policy that they come in and they try to plant suspicion in wives. They'd say, well, where is your husband tonight?
The women didn't think that their husbands were actually going to union meetings.
He would say, oh, he was going out. He was going to go just out. Well, I was a bit on the disgusted side. I thought maybe he was going hanging around a pool room or something to begin with, and I didn't intend to be a pool room widow.
They would have done anything to turn one against the other to cut down the union so it wouldn't get as strong as it did.
It was in the winter season in 1937. And one evening, my husband didn't come home. And he didn't come home for 2 days. We did have a radio, and they mentioned it, that there was a strike.
The strike began at Fisher 1. They were the first ones to strike. And when they struck, they sent the women that were working there out of the plant, and only the men sat in.
The press and the radio was so eager to say that there was sexual mingling in the sit-down that they had to be very careful, and that's one reason that the women were asked to leave.
They did go on strike. So then naturally, we went down there to find out what happened. They says, well, we can't come home. We're sitting here. We're on strike. I said, well, now what are we going to do?
Some of the women of the city of Flint, they came down to the plant, they yelled up to their husbands, this is a hell of a place for you to be. If you don't want to be home with me or take me out someplace, well, it's too bad for you, buddy. And then I saw a couple of very fine union men that were really threatened, and they came down out of that plant and they were booed by their buddies. And that's when we decided to form the Women's Auxiliary.
I didn't much care for the idea of my husband sitting in the plant, and of course I wanted to know what it was all about. When I went to the Union Hall while Walter Reuther was speaking, because he was talking about seniority rights, pensions, and better working conditions in the plant, and I thought, gee, this is a good thing. So I stayed at the meeting to organize more women into the auxiliary.
So like I say, when they went on the strike that day, I didn't even know there was ever going to be a strike. And I imagine if they would have been, I probably wouldn't have been so brave to let him sit down, because I didn't want him to lose the job he did have, because we needed all the money. We bought a house for $25 down, $5 a month, and we had a hard time paying for that.
And of course, it was all very new to me because I had 2 small children at home, and my concern was home and the grocery store and back. But I became quite concerned about his role in the sit-down, and also to mention the fact that he had not been able to accrue seniority because he was a young black worker, and he had been last hired and first laid off.
So next morning, we went down there, and they said, well, just come out here on the picket line. Well, that was my first picket line, but I went.
We made up our minds that we were going to be as big a part of it as the men. And we were, believe me.
A few of the women started coming up with their husbands. A few of the factory girls decided that their jobs were at stake also, and they in turn would bring other women around. We were very optimistic.
They needed protection, I thought. I was on the outside. I could do better there. We had to do something to help them to win this doggone strike.
I was working down here in the kitchen, and some guy from the hall come in and wanted to know who'd volunteer to take food to the strikers, and I said, I will. So then this boy here took the first food over there. Had a big old milk can of coffee and another full of soup. The police up on top of the hill said, well, you don't want to go down there, lady. There's a lot of tear gas down there. I said, I've smelled that before. That don't bother me.
For some of the ladies, they would, call us all kinds of things. Why don't you go and take care of your family? What are you doing out on the street here? But we had a lot of the ladies walk off the sidewalk, join us. They thought we was doing a great thing.
Well, I was busy scrounging around getting food, and then we had to cook it. And that's not an easy task when you're used to cooking for 2 or 3 people, and all of a sudden you cook for 500.
Them men had it made. I don't care what anybody said. They had a ball in them shops.
But when I went down to the union headquarters and I volunteered my services, they said, the strike kitchen. I said, but you've got men who can peel those potatoes, ailing men, sick men who can't walk a picket line. Why does a woman have to go out there? Well, that's where you can serve the most efficiently. And I thought, well, that's the role they've always given to women. So the first thing, I said, what else can I do? I don't intend to go out there. And so I decided I just had to work on my own. And I organized a children's picket line in front of the Big Fisher 1 plant. And that received national publicity. And I had my little 2-year-old boy in the front of it, cute little kid. And he had a sign, "Our daddy strikes for us little tykes."
They had a nursery up in the Penn Galley building where some of the mothers brought their children that was 2 and 3 years old. People donated pillows and playpens. Denora's 2 little boys was up there most of the time.
One lady, she was pregnant, so she went and took care of other people's children so they could get out for the auxiliary and get out and work in the strike kitchens.
When we first started coming up to the Union Hall, you must remember that the union had been the domain solely of men. All of the craft unions, women never went up to union meetings. They weren't wanted. And when we first started coming up there, the men were suspicious, you know. Some of them say, oh, well, they just come out, they're on the make. And so I didn't wear any makeup. I let my hair go straight to let them know. And I had to tell a number of men off when I began playing a little more, aggressive role. Then they thought perhaps there was a deeper reason why we were up there, and they called us queers at the time. That was the term that they called us. She couldn't be too masculine. She couldn't be too feminine. You couldn't be too intellectual, or men resented this more than anything in the world. She was in a damn never land.
And I was just the worst thing in the world going down there with all the neighbors. They didn't have any part in it. They wouldn't go down there at all, but they'd steal every bit of coal I had, or put sugar in a gas tank, so I couldn't get down there. Lily Rose, she lives on the next street. Every time I see her, I'll tell you, dear, it's nobody but the old communists that's doing all of this. I said, well, if it is, there must be an awful lot of them. And now, though, they'll shut up and brag about the pension and this and that. They don't know how they got it either. Makes me halfway mad sometimes when I hear them talk.
We had friends, relatives, neighbors. They called us all sorts of names. And being I was I was born here in the United States, but my folks were foreigners, So, they just thought that I was a genuine old red Bolshevik or anything else.
And what did you think about that?
I didn't care. That didn't bother me because I knew what I was doing and I knew the purpose I was doing it for. I wouldn't have cared if the whole red Russia would have been there just to help us out.
I know that there was a Socialist Party, the Communist Party, helping to organize. Although I never belonged to a party, I feel that had it not been for the education and the know-how that they gave us, we wouldn't have been able to do it.
General Motors had a lot of people, that tried to cause trouble and discourage us. We called them General Motors goons. Our lives were in danger. They were actually prepared with guns and stuff right in the shop, the General Motors men. They were just waiting for our men to do something so they could get at them. That's where this bull run started. There was quite a battle there that day.
The radio had announced to the city of Flint that a riot had broken out down on Chevrolet Avenue in front of Fisher 2, and a revolutionary situation was developing, and you can imagine what an electric shock that was for Flint. And we were down there with unarmed men. just hinges, paving bricks, picking up the fire bombs and throwing them back, and the tear gas and the rest of it. The populace, including my parents at the time, the populace of the city drove down, just as they do for a fire at any time, to gather in back of the police to watch, to observe this. The police said, "Get back, it's dangerous," but they were there to observe. The men were speaking out to the people beyond the police lines, explaining what we're fighting for, what had happened, how the battle broke out. When this happened, we had only the sound car broadcasting to those people. We had nobody on our side. And Victor Ruther and many of the others were there that night on the sound car, the men. And finally, Victor came up to us and he says, "Maybe we're going to have to lose this battle, but we won't lose the war." He said, "But the batteries on the sound truck are running down." And I said, "Oh, let me speak then, Victor." And he looked at me and he said, "Well, I guess it can't hurt any." So I got up on the sound car and I was desperate. And I decided to appeal to the women of the city of Flint at that point. The men had done a marvelous job all evening long, but I got up there and I said, "Women of the city of Flint, break through those police lines and come down here and stand with your husbands and your brothers, your sons and your sweethearts." I said, "They're firing into the bellies of unarmed men down here. The police are cowards. And if they're cowards enough to fire into unarmed men, they're cowards enough to fire on the mothers of children also." And this was electrifying because they thought that there were no women down there until this woman's voice came over the line. And believe me, if you think you can't speak, when you get in a situation like that where it seems like it's a life and death matter, you can find, your heart just comes out through your mouth. You can find the wherewithal to express your emotions. And the women did break through that night. And it was such a great, great thrill. And one cop pulled a woman's coat right off her when she went out of that coat and started marching down. And as soon as women started marching down into the center of the battle, the police didn't want to be accused of firing into the backs of unarmed women, God forbid. And that wound up the battle that night. Then we lighted the bonfires and we sang songs all night long to make sure that the situation was safe. And out of that was born a solidarity and a feeling that women were as courageous and as capable of giving as men. So it was then that we said, why can't women form an organization to deal with these kinds of emergencies when the police attack? And the next couple of days, within the next couple of days, I put out a call for all women who wanted to or could be involved in the dangerous emergency situations to come to the hall.
Janora was up there. She said, "We're going to have to form a brigade to be there when the men need us, no matter what they need us for." I was so impressed with Janora. She impressed me as somebody that knew what she wanted, knew where she was going to go, and was going. So right away, I was one of the first ones to want to join.
And imagine, the first night we had 50 women come up and sign.
There was wives and daughters and sisters of the sit-downers. There was also people that worked into the shops, women all the way from 16 to 65.
And we appointed 5 lieutenants, and they were Ruth Pitts of Fisher One, and Teeter Walker of Redmond, a factory girl. Nellie Besson was very young when she came up. She was a factory worker. She'd just been fired. Whenever the situation needed it, an emergency situation, she, as a lieutenant, would take a brigade off in one direction. This one, a little bundle of dynamite, used to always wear jodhpurs and high-lace boots. And when she got that red beret on, she wasn't very big, but she and Ruth Pitts from Fisher Body had been given blackjacks, woven by the sit-downers in the plant.
And then we had a wristlet that we'd put that under our arm, and we'd bring that up under our coat. All we'd have to do is just give our arm a snap, and it was down in our hand. We had a weapon right there, and nobody knew where it come from.
You know, we didn't only fight for Flint, we fought anywhere where they needed a little support. So they had a women's brigade in Saginaw, they had one in Detroit, they had one in Lansing. They all started their own brigade.
It went up to around 400, the brigade did.
No matter when they says, okay,
We need help in the kitchen, we were there. We need somebody out on the picket line, we were there. They needed food brought in, we were there.
I don't think there's ever been a time in history when the people stood together. We had the carpenters, the painters, the bus drivers, the teachers, waitresses union. All the unions were behind us.
We wasn't individuals any longer. We were part of an organization.
Well, at this time, the strike had gone on for weeks. General Motors had just refused to budge.
We never thought General Motors would ever give in because a big company and us just little nobodies.
They tried every way in the world to get the men out of Fisher 2 and out of Fisher 1. First, they turned the heat off on them. Then they turned the water off on them. But they stuck anyway.
They didn't want to see working people organize and become a powerful force. They understood the dynamics of power more so than the workers did. Later, when we began to negotiate and understand and looked at the books and saw how much profits they were taking, then we became more interested in let's put the record on the table and see how much we're getting back and how much you're taking away. That's when it became a real power instrument. And we understood that through unity there is strength.
The strike itself was taking its toll of the people who were out of work. They were doing without food, and the welfare systems were not able to cope with it, the situation. And so we knew that we had to do something drastic. And Chevrolet Plant 4 in Flint, Michigan produced all of the motors for the low-priced Chevrolet car across the whole nation. And we knew if we could tie up that plant, that would tie up General Motors. But nobody knew quite how to go about it because it's a huge plant, a very great structure, 8,000 people in this one structure. Now, all the way over on the outer side of the complex was a Plant 9, and this produced bearings. We let it be leaked out that Plant 9 was the secret plant, and a stool pigeon went back and told the corporation. Consequently, when the men did sit down on Plant 9, all of the company police from all the other aspects of this compound rushed into Plant 9. The city police were there, and the women, of course. The women were told Plant 9 was the plant, too, except I happened to know my husband was trying his best to shut down the big plant.
The women are all on one side of the street. The police are down the middle. The men are on the opposite side of the street, but the police had their guns aimed at the men. But all at once, Ed Placey broke out a window, and he was blood all over, and he hollered, "They're gassing us." And about that time, the women went into action, breaking the windows.
Our man was in there, and we didn't want him tear gassed.
Now, naturally, those men could not survive in there. As the ambulance pulled up and pulled out the injured ones, the strike was lost. I sent the brigade back to the Penn Galley building. The Union Sound car and the men went back to the Penn Galley building. And I just said, let's saunter around to my 5 lieutenants. And then I told them, once we started walking down there, I said, for God's sake, the real action is in Plant 4. One of the lieutenants we sent for the telephone called Penn Galley building at once.
They said, okay, they're having trouble down to Plant 4, get down there.
When we got to the gate, the men were having a very difficult time. One or two of the men, some of the Union men, looked out and said, for God's sake, guard that gate, let no one through there. So by the time we were down here in front, we saw the city police coming, the whole squad of them. We strung ourselves across that gate, and we grabbed a hold of each other like that, and really, we were a little bit scared at first, I can't deny it. And we just stood there, and they said, out of the way, we're going in. And we said, over our dead bodies, you're going in. And we were able to talk to them and get them to procrastinate long enough. Because, again, they didn't want to club us. And we started talking to them, remember, if your wife was out here. Yeah.
We said, what if you had a brother in there or a husband in there? Wouldn't you try to protect them? And we kept talking back and forth, one and then the other. Well, I got a brother. I had nobody, but I didn't let them know it. We kept talking back and forth until we stalled for time. That's right. Then all at once we heard solidarity and looked up, and here comes all these women and men down the street singing at the top of their voice.
And I said, formation picket line in a circle, God. And we were thrilled. We just felt like we had saved the situation.
They stayed put till General Motors agreed to bargain with the UAW.
The victory was won, and the UAW was born.
This one strike really started everything and proved that it could be done. I just felt so good to think that I had a part in it and got others interested, and we got to where we're at. And I don't regret it, and if I had to do it all over again, I think I'd have more fight in me than I ever had to accomplish what women want to accomplish.
One thing I think that came of the women being active, it gave the men a different outlook on the ordinary housewife. Before, it'd always been a housewife or a mother. That's the only image they had. But after the union was organized, it gave the men a deeper respect of the working woman.
Well, golly, you gained a lot, I thought, because we had better working conditions after that, and foreman wasn't breathing down your neck all the time. And without it now, I don't know what would become of us.
Right.
It helped the whole country.
The Red Beret woman became a symbol of a different new type of woman who was ready to sacrifice her life, as the men felt they were, in gaining the victories that we finally won from the world's largest industrial corporation. Following the strike, the emergency brigades were effectively dispersed. There was none of the usual thing of financing or encouraging on the part of the men. What happened in effect, if you can imagine this, from the International on down, everybody in it said, thank you, ladies. You have done a wonderful job. We appreciate it very much, but now the laundry is piled up, the dishes are piled up, and the kids need attention.
The Coalition of Women Labor Unionists has asked
that you have a woman spokesman on the program?
Yell it up there!
May we have the 15 minutes that they requested? We'd like your answer.
Let her speak!
Sit down, sit down.
UAW needs an ERA. UAW needs an ERA. UAW needs an ERA.
We would be very happy to have whichever one of the spokesmen it is, that they would please come forward before he closes the program.
This time, present to the audience, Nora Donovan.
I am not up here as an individual, but I am speaking for the many women who have worked in the factories and in the mines and the mills of this country for 40 years. And now I would like to say just a word about the shop workers up to date in AC and Loeb and Turnstead and the other locals, the women. The women, I feel, need a greater representation in this union. I would like to see the union, in its next negotiation, take up the issue of nursery schools for working mothers. Because every woman in this audience knows, and many of you men know, that women have not been able to participate on a full-time basis in the shop because she has to go home and get the supper, buy the groceries, take care of the kids, and do the washing and ironing and cleaning on the weekend. You know that. Do you remember, some of you people, when John L. Lewis stood right here in the IMA auditorium? Do you remember that? And the rafters were packed? And when we sang Solidarity, the very walls vibrated. I would like to recite it again. I did at the convention, the last verse of it, so that the young people can remember and perhaps begin to sing it again. The last stanza goes, in our hands is placed a power greater than their word gold, greater than the might of armies magnified 1,000-fold. We can bring to birth a new world from the ashes of the old, for the union makes us strong. Solidarity forever.